Kappa was born Endre Erno Friedman in Budapest in 1913, the son of a Jewish tailor and a mother who believed her boy was destined for more than mending clothes. Restless and defiant, he was expelled from school for political protests before he turned 20. In the early 1930s, Europe was unraveling. Fascism spread like a contagion. Kappa fled first to Berlin, then to Paris, carrying little more than a second-hand Leica camera and an unshakable instinct to point it toward injustice. In Paris, he met Gerda Taro, a German refugee with the same fire in her eyes. Together, they became lovers, partners, and inventors of a myth. To make editors pay attention, they created a fictional American celebrity photographer they called Robert Kappa. The trick worked. Magazines bought the photos, money arrived, and the name stuck. Kappa was born out of survival and ambition, and soon that name would travel to every battlefield of his generation. The Spanish front. Spain was already burning. The Civil War had turned cities into front lines. Kappa and Taro went where few dared. The trenches of Madrid, the fields of Brunette, the rooftops where snipers waited. In 1936, Kappa captured a militiaman at the instant of death. The photograph, titled "The Falling Soldier," published worldwide, it made him famous and controversial. Was it spontaneous? Staged? No one ever proved either way. But what mattered was what it showed, the human heartbeat between life and death. 1 year later, tragedy struck. While covering the battle near Brunette, Gerda Taro was crushed by a Republican tank during a retreat. She became the first female war photographer to die in combat. Kappa buried her in Paris. Friends said something inside him was buried too. From then on, every picture carried the weight of her absence, the road to Normandy. When Europe descended into World War again, Kappa followed. He photographed the London Blitz, the Allied build-up in Italy, and the anxious faces of soldiers waiting to cross the Channel. By 1944, editors at Life magazine considered him the best combat photographer alive, and the most reckless. On May 31st, Life's London office briefed its correspondents. The Allied invasion of France was imminent. Kappa volunteered instantly. When asked which wave he wanted to join, he replied, "The first, that's where the story is." He packed 2 Contax 2 cameras, 10 rolls of film, and enough cigarettes to calm a small army. Omaha Beach. At dawn on June 6, 1944, Kappa boarded landing craft LCI-85 with soldiers of the 16th Regiment, 1st Infantry Division. The sea heaved violently. Many men were already vomiting from nerves and motion. As the ramps dropped, machine gun fire erupted. Kappa followed the first wave into waist-deep water. He would later write that the sound was like the world cracking open. Shells tore through men around him. Medics fell before reaching the sand. Kappa stumbled forward, fell flat, crawled behind a tank obstacle. He raised his camera, snapped, and for an instant the chaos froze. Each frame cost him seconds that could have been his last. He took 106 photographs in barely half an hour. A wave nearly swept him under. Another blast blew sand across his lens. When an officer shouted that the beach was a massacre, Kappa turned and crawled back to the surf, clutching his film canisters beneath his jacket like organs torn from his chest. He boarded a hospital ship headed back to England, shaking so badly he couldn't light a cigarette. The darkroom disaster. Life's darkroom at 48. Dean Street in London was chaos that night. Editors wanted the photos before the morning edition. Kappa's film arrived soaked in seawater and sand. A young technician, Dennis Banks, hurried to dry the negatives in a cabinet. In his panic, he closed the door and turned the heat too high. Moments later, the emulsion began to melt. Out of 106 frames, only 11 survived. They were blurry, distorted, ghostly figures emerging from smoke and surf, but Life printed them under the caption, "Slightly out of focus." The world was mesmerized. Kappa's images captured the confusion, fear, and humanity of invasion more vividly than any perfect composition ever could. They became the photographs of D-Day, yet Kappa never recovered from the loss. To him, those missing 95 frames represented not failure, but ghosts. Proof that truth is fragile, that history can melt away in a moment of heat. After the beach. In the weeks that followed, Kappa moved through France with Allied troops. He photographed liberation and ruin, captured Parisians weeping as German convoys surrendered, and shot the moment when the Eiffel Tower stood free again. Soldiers treated him like one of their own. They called him the Mad Hungarian. He laughed with them, drank with them, and when mortar shells landed, he dived beside them. But inside, he was unraveling. The noise of bombs became a kind of silence that followed him even in sleep. Friends said he'd wake up screaming in hotel rooms, reaching for his camera as if it could protect him. The war ended in 1945, but for Kappa, peace was an illusion. He had survived. But the part of him that believed survival meant victory was gone. Between two wars. The guns of Europe fell silent in 1945, but for Robert Kappa, the silence was unbearable. He had seen the inside of war, the smell of oil, cordite, and blood. And yet the quiet rooms of peacetime made him restless. He moved between Paris, London, and New York, a celebrity among journalists, but a ghost among friends. Parties, women, and laughter filled the void for a while, yet every time he raised a glass, he saw the faces of soldiers he'd photographed who never made it home. In interviews, he joked that he wanted to cover one last war and then retire to a beach somewhere. But the world wasn't finished fighting, neither was he. The birth of Magnum. In 1947, Kappa gathered 4 of his closest colleagues, Henri Cartier-Bresson, George Roger, David Shim Seymour, and William Vandivert, in a Paris café. They shared a simple dream. Photographers should own their negatives and their stories. Editors shouldn't decide which truths survived. They called their cooperative Magnum photos, like the bottle of champagne they opened that night. And it would redefine photojournalism forever. Magnum gave war photographers freedom and responsibility. "We are not soldiers," Kappa said, "but we are close enough to be shot at." Under its banner, they captured a world struggling to rebuild. Berlin's ruins, refugees in Poland, the birth of Israel, the faces of displaced children who had lost everything. For a time, Kappa felt he had found purpose again, to show not only war, but what came after it, the weight of survival. Fame brought invitations, exhibitions, and money, but inside, Kappa fought a private war. He drank too much, gambled too easily, and laughed too loudly, the usual armor of men who had seen too much. He avoided talk of Normandy. When friends mentioned D-Day, he changed the subject. "All brave men are scared men," he once said. "The difference is in what they do next." Sometimes he taught young photographers, warning them never to confuse courage with recklessness. Yet when a telegram arrived from Life magazine in early 1954, asking if he would cover the French war in Indochina, he hesitated only a moment before saying yes. His friends begged him not to go. "It's not your war," they said. "No," Kappa replied, "but it's someone's." Into Indochina, the French campaign in Vietnam was collapsing. The jungles were green and unforgiving. The roads were narrow trails through rice fields, mined by unseen hands. Kappa arrived in late April 1954, armed with 2 Contax cameras, a notebook, and the same curiosity that had taken him onto Omaha Beach 10 years before. He traveled with French patrols, photographing villages caught between 2 armies. He wrote in letters that the humidity ruined his film faster than bullets, that children smiled even as shells echoed in the distance. To the soldiers, he was the crazy reporter who kept stepping ahead of the column for a better angle. On May 25th, near the village of Tai Bin, Kappa followed a convoy down a dirt road bordered by tall grass. A lieutenant warned him, "Stay on the path. The fields are mined." Kappa smiled, adjusted his camera strap, and stepped off the road to frame a shot of soldiers crossing a ditch. An explosion tore through the air. The last frame. When the smoke cleared, Kappa lay face down, one shoe blown off, his camera still around his neck. He was killed instantly. The film inside his camera survived, showing in its final frame the patrol walking down the same path he had just left. His body was carried to Hanoi the next day. Life magazine's message to its New York office was only 5 words long. "Kappa is dead, killed mine." He was 40 years old. His funeral in New York drew journalists, soldiers, artists, and strangers who had never met him, but felt they knew him through his pictures. Henri Cartier-Bresson spoke only one sentence: he was always a little too close. The photos that wouldn't die. 10 years later, Magnum Photos thrived. New generations of photographers carried Kappa's philosophy into Korea, Algeria, and Vietnam. His D-Day negatives, the surviving 11 frames, became sacred relics of journalism. They were studied in classrooms, reprinted in textbooks, displayed in museums. But the story didn't end there. In 2007, researchers in Mexico City discovered a weathered suitcase containing 500 negatives from the Spanish Civil War. Lost works of Robert Capa, Gerda Taro, and their friend Chim Seymour. Inside those fragile rolls was the beginning of everything. The young man and woman who believed a camera could stop lies. Historians called it the Mexican suitcase. For those who knew Kappa's legend, it felt as if part of him had returned home. What remains? Today, Kappa's 11 surviving D-Day images rest in the International Center of Photography in New York. Founded by his brother, Cornel Kappa, each frame is slightly blurred, as if the film itself still trembles with the fear of that morning. The first shows soldiers wading through surf up to their shoulders. The last captures a single man crouched behind steel obstacles, waves breaking over his helmet, anonymous, eternal. Those photographs are not about victory. They are about endurance. They remind us that truth in war is never clear. It's messy, frightened, human, slightly out of focus, legacy of a witness. Robert Capa changed how the world sees war. Before him, combat photography was distant, bodies arranged after battles, generals posing with maps. After him, it was immediate, chaotic, alive. Every war photographer since, from Vietnam to Bosnia to Ukraine, walks in his shadow. They carry not only his courage but also his warning. "If your pictures aren't good enough," he said, "you're not close enough." But every professional knows the rest of that sentence, the part he never wrote: get too close and you don't come back. His name lives in awards, schools, and the moral compass of journalism. But more than that, it lives in the idea that photographs can make the powerful accountable and the invisible seen, the shutter that never closed. On that morning in Normandy, Robert Capa's camera clicked 11 times that history would remember. Each click was a heartbeat of a man who chose to stand where no one wanted to stand, to see what no one else could bear to see. He didn't chase glory, he chased honesty. And though his life ended in a field half a world away, the light he captured has never faded. In every blurred image of courage, in every photograph that dares to confront violence with truth, his spirit remains, slightly out of focus, perfectly clear.